Before the flood, the earth wasn't just violent, it was unrecognizable. In the shadows of the mountains and forgotten valleys, gigantic creatures walked like wild kings, crushing everything in their path. Their eyes blazed like embers, their voices shook the ground. They were the Nephilim, beings so monstrous that ancient civilizations preferred to erase them from memory rather than try to explain their existence. But the Bible hasn't forgotten them. It whispers that they were the very reason God needed to destroy the entire world. What if I told you that these giants not only existed, but dominated the earth? That their enormous bodies devoured flocks, villages, and even entire peoples? That their violence was so extreme that it corrupted the very fabric of humanity? What you are about to hear is not myth nor legend. It's the dark story that almost no one dares to tell. In this video, you will be taken to one of the most hidden and disturbing chapters of Scripture, a period so dark it has been almost erased by history, but preserved by the Bible as an eternal warning. Here, you will discover who were the Nephilim really, those giants who walked the earth before the flood, not as mythological figures or poetic metaphors, but as physical, hybrid beings, born from a forbidden union between fallen angels and human women. You will understand how it all began on Mount Hermon, when a group of watchers made a secret pact, sealed by oath, promising to corrupt humanity from within. A pact that would change the fate of the world and trigger a chain of events that still echoes today. You'll see it up close. The violent and devouring practices of these giants beings that surpassed all limits of cruelty, oppression, cannibalism, brutal domination, mass destruction. Creatures that drained the life from the earth until it was transformed into a field of death. We will also reveal how the existence of the Nephilim led God to decree the greatest judgment in history, the flood. Not by divine whim, but because corruption had reached an irreversible point. Human genetics were being erased, and creation itself was being rewritten. And finally, you will be confronted with something even more unsettling. Modern evidence and parallels suggest that this period may be attempting to resurface today. Cultural, spiritual, and symbolic signs indicate that the covenant of Mount Hermon may not have been buried as deeply as we believe. Get ready. What will be revealed here is not for the faint of heart. It's the forgotten truth about the age of giants and what it might mean for us now. Before we move on to the next revelation, and it goes far beyond what is usually told in churches or books, I need you to do something simple but essential. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications right now. This is not just to help the channel, but to ensure you don't miss any chapter of this dark investigation into the hidden mysteries of the Bible. What we are about to explore involves forbidden pacts, fallen angels, devouring giants, and secrets that shaped the history of humanity before the flood. These are themes that many avoid, few understand, and that almost no one dares to delve into in depth. Then click on sign up and activate the bell, because from now on, every detail matters, and what comes next is just the beginning of the darkest part that the Bible tried to warn us about. Imagine an earth completely different from the one we know. There were no cities, no kingdoms, no walls or armies. The world was wild, vast, and silent, covered by colossal forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. The mountains were natural walls, so ancient that their peaks were swallowed by the clouds. The rivers flowed freely, cutting through deep valleys where man still walked like a fragile creature, trying to survive among beasts that today we only know as fossils. It was a time before writing, before traditions, before any civilization, but despite its purity and simplicity, something strange hung over that primitive earth, something that didn't fit with the natural harmony of the lost Eden, a silent, observant, and colossal presence. In humanity's earliest dawns, gigantic shadows crossed the clearings even before the sun touched the ground. Ancient trees bent not to the wind, but to the passage of creatures so large that their steps made the soft earth tremble. primitive man looked up and saw not only the sky, he saw immense silhouettes, impossible outlines, beings too tall, too strong, too fast to be called human. And that feeling became constant. Something bigger was walking between them. Although empires did not yet exist, dominion had already taken hold. Although formal wars had not yet taken hold, oppression had already existed. Before man built cities, strange forces had already claimed the earth for themselves. It was as if creation had been invaded by a race that did not belong to that world. Beings that had not been molded from dust, like Adam, but had emerged from a forbidden crossbreeding, something that the planet itself seemed to reject. Back then, the air felt heavy, the night deeper, the fear more ancient. Humanity was still in its infancy, but the giants already reigned, and the earth began to feel the weight of its presence. It was in this primitive world, still silent and vulnerable, that something unnatural began to emerge. At first, humans didn't understand. They thought it was just a new species of wild creature, an aberration of nature. But it soon became clear, this was not the work of Earth. These were beings that surpassed all natural logic, all biological limits, all order established by the Creator. Ancient accounts, preserved in fragments, whispers, and apocryphal texts, describe the moment when the Watchers, observant angels sent to watch over humanity, made a decision that would forever change the fate of the world. Fascinated by the beauty of human women, they broke the sacred boundary between the spiritual and the physical. They descended, took wives for themselves, and begot a lineage of hybrid beings, beings that should not exist, the Nephilim. They were giants in stature, but also in brutality. Their proportions were enormous, bones as thick as tree trunks, muscles braided like living ropes, strength enough to tear beasts in half and destroy entire villages with their bare hands. They possessed an incessant hunger, an appetite that no prey could satisfy. When the animals of the earth became insufficient, they began to devour what remained: men, women, children. But the terror wasn't just in their size, it was in what they represented. A genetic, spiritual, and moral corruption, a direct interference with human DNA, an attack on the very design of creation. The Nephilim did not belong to the natural world. They were not part of the divine plan. They were intruders, living proof that something had gone awry. As they grew in number and power, the balance of the earth broke down. Entire peoples lived in constant fear of being spotted by a hungry giant. Humanity began to bow down, not before God, but before these monsters. And so, the central problem emerged with frightening clarity. Earth was being overrun by a hybrid race, violent and impossible to contain. A race born of sin, nurtured by violence, and destined to destroy all that was human. To understand how the Nephilim came to be, we need to return to where it all began, Monte Hermona, giant of stone piercing the clouds, imposing, isolated, shrouded in mists that conceal more than they reveal. In those times, humans dared not approach its slopes. Something in the air seemed heavy, different, charged with a strange energy, as if the entire mountain silently observed any intruder. It was there, according to the oldest records, that one of the most dangerous events in the spiritual history of humanity occurred. Led by Semjaza, a high-ranking angel among the Watchers, a group of approximately 200 celestial beings gathered atop the mountain. They knew they were about to commit an irreversible act. They knew they were violating a divine law. They knew it would cost them dearly. But even so, they went ahead. Semjaza feared retreating alone. He feared being the only one to bear the blame. Therefore, before any action, he proposed a pact, an unbreakable oath sealed between them all. Under the starry sky, each watcher placed their hand on the ground of Mount Hermon and promised, "Together we will do this. Together we will suffer the consequences." It was this pact that corrupted the world. Upon descending, the Watchers took human women as wives. They taught them forbidden knowledge, technologies too advanced for that era. Metallurgy, enchantments, distorted cosmology, arts of war, and spiritual manipulations that humanity should not know so soon. And from these forbidden unions was born the monstrous lineage, the Nephilim. These beings were not merely giants, they were spiritual aberrations, bodies of flesh with a corrupted celestial origin, beings with immense strength and an inner emptiness that made them violent, ravenous, and incapable of coexisting with humanity. The pact on Mount Hermon was, in fact, the first major act of collective rebellion since the fall of Lucifer, a direct attack on the plan of creation, an attempt to replace what God had fashioned from dust with a hybrid race, part man, part angel, and utterly destructive. From that point on, the earth would never be the same again. Mount Hermon has become a symbol of corruption, the cradle of giants and the beginning of the end for pre-flood humanity. When the Nephilim spread across the earth, the world plunged into a spiral of violence that no subsequent generation has ever witnessed. It was as if creation had been ripped from its axis, natural harmony shattered, spiritual order was corrupted, and humanity began to live as prey, not as the dominant species. Ancient accounts paint a desperate picture. Entire villages awoke to the ground trembling, knowing it wasn't an earthquake, but the approaching footsteps of a giant. The forests fell silent, not because the animals feared man, but because they feared being hunted by the Nephilim. And as the animals began to disappear, the giants turned their eyes to the only remaining source of food, humankind itself. It wasn't just physical destruction, it was humiliation. It was his domain. It was psychological terror. The Nephilim demanded tributes of meat and food. They demanded that entire clans prostrate themselves before them. Some giants proclaimed themselves gods, forcing families to sacrifice their children to avoid being crushed alive. Humanity, still young, still learning to plant, to build, to survive, simply had no way to resist. And along with this oppression came something even more terrible: moral decay. The Watchers had taught forbidden knowledge, weapons, spells, manipulation of the elements, spiritual seductions. And man, seduced by power, began to imitate his fallen masters. The first organized wars arose, the first ritual tortures, the first obscure practices that would later be remembered as occultism. The human heart, already fragile, was now molded by the influence of the fallen. Violence is no longer the exception. It has become a language. Death has ceased to be a source of fear and has become routine. Corruption is no longer an accident. It has become a cultural norm. The giants crushed bodies, men crushed souls. Entire peoples disappeared before even becoming civilizations. Places that could have been the cradle of cultures never progressed beyond the stage of destroyed villages. The earth became a field of living ruins, where each day was a struggle to exist, and God was watching. With every cry, every tear, every injustice, the earth was crying out for intervention. The world was so corrupt that evil was no longer the exception, it was the rule. And humanity was on the brink of moral and physical extinction. This is how the age of giants became the age of violence, and the trial clock began to tick. If the brutality of the Nephilim devastated the earth from the outside, the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers destroyed humanity from within. Never before had creation witnessed such a rapid and so fatal advance in human knowledge. It was not science, it was corruption. It was not learning, it was distortion. And it all began with what the Watchers taught the women they took for themselves, and then the men seduced by power. Semjaza and his followers introduced advanced metallurgy, revealing techniques for smelting metals in ways that entire villages had never imagined. Where once there were spears of wood and stone, sharp blades, heavy axes, and primitive swords, impossible to stop emerged. weapons that completely changed the balance of power between tribes, and that served as tools of massacre when they fell into the hands of men influenced by the giants. Other watchers brought magic and witchcraft, teaching how to manipulate herbs, poisons, incantations, and spiritual summons. These dark arts spread like a disease. What was once mere superstition became pact, ritual, invocation. The boundary between the natural and the supernatural began to break down, not in a divine way, but in a profane one. They also revealed corrupted astrology. It was not the pure observation of the heavens, but distorted interpretations that promised power, destiny, and control. Men began to guide their lives not by wisdom, but by the spiritual manipulation of celestial bodies. The earth became filled with cults, altars, strange practices, sacrifices, and secret codes. Azazel, one of the most corrupting figures, taught seductive ornaments, body painting, devices to manipulate desires, which inflamed disordered passions and encouraged moral decay. Women were adorned as ritual objects, and men plunged into destructive obsessions. It was the birth of the first practices that would later be associated with lust and idolatry. Forbidden knowledge also generated something even more dangerous. Greed tribes fought amongst themselves for stronger weapons, more powerful enchantments, and secrets that could impress or subdue the Nephilim. Humanity fragmented. Each clan coveted the power the Watchers offered, even knowing that power was corrupted. Earth has become a laboratory of perversion. The advancement of knowledge has not brought light, it has brought darkness. And each step forward was, in fact, a step deeper into the abyss. This is how pre-flood society ceased to be merely a victim and became complicit in his own downfall. As the Nephilim multiplied, the earth ceased to be merely a corrupted world. It became a world unrecognizable. The original creation no longer existed. The natural balance had been destroyed, the cycles of life broken, and even the animals, according to ancient records, began to exhibit unnatural behaviors, a result of the influence of the giants and the fallen watchers. The Nephilim, hungry and out of control, devoured everything around them. Entire herds were consumed in a few hours. Dense forests disappeared beneath their enormous hands. Entire regions where abundance once existed became barren deserts, marked only by gigantic footprints and scattered carcasses. Wherever the Nephilim passed, life receded. Human slavery intensified. Men were forced to build colossal monuments dedicated to the giants themselves, who were worshipped as gods. Women were treated as property. Children disappeared without a trace, victims of insatiable hunger or gruesome rituals practiced by hybrid beings. Human blood has become a resource. Violence, a universal language. Cruelty, a frequent spectacle. And the most terrifying thing, the Nephilim began to try with creation itself. Apocryphal records suggest that they mixed species, manipulated animals, and crossbred beings in unnatural ways, an attempt to expand their biological and spiritual dominion over the earth. It was a distortion so profound that even the soil seemed to betray the corruption. Nature itself cried out for justice. Humanity, already small and fragile, was on the brink of extinction. Not only physical, but moral and spiritual. Evil had ceased to be a human choice and had become an atmosphere, an environment, a global culture. The human heart, created for good, was drowning in fear, violence, and idolatry. Corruption was so widespread that, according to the biblical text, God saw that all flesh had become corrupt, not just humans, but all life on earth. The entire creation was infected by the impact of the Mount Hermon Pact. From that point on, it was no longer a question of punishment. It was a matter of preservation. If nothing were done, the earth would cease to be earth. Humanity would cease to be human. The flood was not just a judgment, it was the only way to restart a world that had already been completely devoured by the Age of Giants. A world where evil had a body, a name, and size. But even after the flood, After the force of the waters swept away mountains, kingdoms, civilizations, and giants from the face of the earth, a silent question remained echoing throughout the centuries. Was the covenant at Mount Hermon truly broken, or just asleep? The ancient texts do not offer absolute closure. On the contrary, they leave small gaps, narrative loopholes that suggest that what began before the flood did not completely end with it. There are accounts scattered throughout ancient traditions that some watchers were not destroyed, but imprisoned, that their forbidden teachings remained hidden, preserved in the shadows, waiting to be rediscovered by overly curious human hands. There are historical records of peoples who thousands of years later returned to worshipping giant beings, hybrid deities, demigods that strongly resemble the Nephilim. Legends about titans, fallen gods, children of the stars, masters of celestial metallurgy, and creatures of great stature who taught magic to men. Coincidence or echo? When we look at the modern world, some unsettling patterns reappear. The growing obsession with modify the human body, the relentless pursuit of crossing genetic boundaries, the fascination with occult knowledge and ancient spiritual practices, the resurgence of cults that speak of beings from heaven bringing forbidden wisdom, humans trying again to become more than human, exactly the kind of ambition that opened the door to pre-flood chaos. And most disturbingly, researchers, archaeologists, and historians are finding signs of ancient structures in regions associated with Mount Hermon, suggesting that the original pact was not just a one-off event, but the beginning of an ongoing spiritual lineage. If the fallen watchers influenced humanity once, is it possible that they could influence another? If the Nephilim ever walked the earth, would it be impossible that a new generation, not a physical one, but a spiritual one, is trying to resurface? The questions linger in the air like a heavy fog. What if the return isn't physical, but ideological? What if the modern world is unknowingly repeating the same steps that led to the flood? What if the pact was never broken, just forgotten? In the next video, we'll investigate these connections, the traces left in ancient cultures, the current signs, and the possibility that the age of giants isn't just a thing of the past, but at the gates of the present. Get ready. What comes next is even deeper and more disturbing. More.